I've never found myself in something so baffling, so confounding, so troubling, and ultimately so mind-blowing as what I found myself in the middle of in 1998 as the columnist for the Chicago Tribune, watching The Last Dance from the inside out. Big sit-down interviews in late March with Jerry Krause, the GM, and then in early May during the Charlotte playoff series, big sit-down in Phil Jackson's office with the coach of the Bulls. And what I heard from each of these two men, whose relationship obviously had completely deteriorated, was just difficult for me to process. And I remind everybody, I had just come to Chicago before that season, straight from Dallas, Texas, where I'd written 3 books about the Dallas Cowboys. The second of those books predicted that Jerry Jones would soon fire Jimmy Johnson. That was after their first Super Bowl. Obviously, they won a second together, and then Jerry fired Jimmy, as my book predicted in the final chapter would happen. Everybody told me I was out of my mind then, but I said, no, this is predictable. That blow up I got. This one I still can't get. And Shannon, here's the point. During that playoff run, I caught Michael after one game, and I told him that Phil was just openly saying, and we were all presuming, that if Phil got fired, if his contract didn't get renewed, and we knew that was going to happen because he and Jerry had fallen completely apart, that everybody presumed that Michael was going to go too. And Phil was openly saying to everybody, including me in that big sit-down interview, that Michael had run out of gas in 1998, and because of his loyalty to Phil, he was just going to flat out retire. Remember, we're talking about the greatest player who ever played in any team sport, willing to walk away in the heart of his prime, or at least at the end of his prime, and missing his age 35, 36, and 37 season by just sitting out, which is what he ultimately, as we know, did. But when I asked Michael about Phil's contention that Michael would just up and retire, Michael really coldly replied to me, "That's Phil's opinion." And that was the first sign of life and hope that I heard from Michael Jordan. And it made me very happy because there was no reason for Michael to go too. And as we all know, Jerry Krause had plucked Phil Jackson out of obscurity. He was a coach in the CBA for the Albany Patroons, hired him as assistant coach. Then when Phil kissed up and buddied up to Jerry Krause, Jerry fell in love with Phil and finally replaced Doug Collins with Phil Jackson. Doug had coached Michael for 3 of his early years. And yet once Phil got hold of the reins of the organization and they won their first championship, Phil completely turned on Jerry. He had just duped him to get the job and began to mistreat him just the way Michael and Scotty shamed and ridiculed little tiny, the penguin as I called him, Jerry Krause. So Jerry Krause was livid and wanted to get even with Phil. We get that. And he already had a handshake agreement with Tim Floyd from Iowa State to be the new coach of the Bulls. So I publicly encouraged Michael to just forget about Phil. Forget about Tim Floyd, as they called him Pink Floyd off the rock group. That was their sarcastic term for him because Phil loved Pink Floyd. And I thought Michael could then go to Jerry Krause and say, hey, look, I realize the bridge is burned between Jerry and Phil. I got it. They'll never coexist again. So let's forget about Phil, but don't give me Tim Floyd or Pink Floyd. Give me a real coach. Bring back Doug Collins. Obviously, Doug ultimately went with Michael for his last hurrah years, 38 and 39 years old in Washington. Give me Doug Collins back. Give me anybody who's a made man in the NBA as a head coach. Anybody with credibility, stature, and experience, and I'll go forward. Why Michael wouldn't do that to this day haunts me, because that was the move to be made. And I believe Jerry Reinsdorf would have compromised with that move. Keep Jerry Krause as the GM, bring in another coach that Michael signs off on, not Tim Floyd. But as we all know, Michael stuck by his guns inexplicably, which is why I can't wait for maybe episode 10 of The Last Dance. I want to hear what Michael says about this, because I wrote to conclude my column in May and June that year. I said the worst sports thought I could ever think is Michael Jordan gone at age 35 and Phil still coaching at 53. And as we all know, Phil went right on, it took 1 year, he went right on to the Lakers and wound up coaching Shaq and Kobe to 3 straight championships. And what did I always call Phil? Everybody called him this.
Harrison said that head coach Mike Tomlin handed him an envelope after delivering a hard hit on a Browns receiver in 2010. Harrison was initially fined $75,000 for the hit, but it was later reduced to $50,000. Harrison's agent has denied this, and guys, even Steelers president Art Rooney is denying that this ever happened. Shannon, what's your reaction to the story?
Well, hell, it might have been an envelope from the NFL office. Say, here you go. They said it to me. They got the wrong address. And so I'm just handing it to you. Skip, obviously this is not a good look, because the way it's being portrayed is that it was money for a hard hit, which can be construed as a bounty. And Sean Payton talked about this as like, I lost the season for this. And, so it's not a good look for the Steelers, and this is why they're knocking it down. The agent has tried to knock it down. And for me, and James knows better. He knows how this is going to be construed. He knows this, and this was over 10 years ago. So to bring this up and the NFL go back and look at this and might retroactively do something, because there's precedent here, Skip. You cannot pay someone outside of their salary to injure, to do something extra that outside of the scope of what you would normally get paid for. And, Skip, they did away with bounties because they used to be very prevalent. You cover the NFL long enough, you know they would put a bounty out on anybody. Buddy Ryan put a bounty out on the kicker for Dallas, Skip. Yeah. And you remember he kicked it off, and they like to knock him out of the game. Sure. So it was very prevalent. Even when I came into the league, Skip, they put a bounty on people. And that was the thing, but they've done away with that. And for James to bring that back up now, I don't see a reason or what good could come out of that.
Okay, I hear that, but you know James. I know James because he's on our show a lot as a contributor. Yep. Mm-hmm. I like James Harrison. I believe in James Harrison, in his insight into defensive strategy and mentality, and in him telling truth.
Yeah.
I tend to believe this happened. I don't know that it happened, but I don't think James Harrison would just flat out make it up. It's too big a thing just to make up. Now, you can argue about why bring it up now. It does what good, how, why. You got me. But remember, he's talked about that hit on Massaquoi on our show before. And he's made the point that's sort of a bittersweetly funny point that if I'd known I was going to get fined $75,000 for that hit, I wouldn't have hit him with about 50% of what I had. He said he was just trying to dislodge the football, wasn't going after him, was not trying to hurt him in any way, shape, or form. He actually said on the podcast that some receivers on other teams had come to him in pregame warm-ups and said, hey, I'll shoot you a little something if you'll hit me up high instead of down low. The receivers, as you know, Shannon, being one yourself, you were most fearful of your knees, not your head at that point in time. Nobody cared as much about your head as you did about your money makers, your knees. Your knee goes, you might be gone for good. So
that's true.
James is saying, I'm trying to go higher. for the sake of the receivers. And he said, on my daddy's grave, I hit Massaquoi with about half of what I had to deliver. I was just trying to dislodge the football on a receiver.
Right.
It wasn't like hitting a running back in the hole. So he was shocked that he got fined $75, which finally got reduced to $50. But he also said in the podcast,